Hello and welcome to today's presentation on the Durham Manifesto, presented by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum, whose mission is to honor anti-slavery abolitionists, their work to end slavery, and the legacy of that struggle, and strives to complete the second and ongoing abolition, the moral conviction to end racism. The 1942 Durham Manifesto was a seminal document published by the Southern Conference on Race Relations that met in Durham, North Carolina, on October 20th, 1942. The group was composed of 57 prominent Black Southern leaders who were discussing the growing civil rights movement and what could be done to promote inter-race cooperation to address the issues of segregation in the American South. The manifesto published the key issues that they discussed, such as securing the rights of Black Americans to vote, anti-lynching laws, eradicating poll taxes, and ending segregation, among many other issues. Overall, the document was vehemently against Jim Crow-imposed segregation and called for whites to be allies for the movement to gain equal rights for all. It was published on December 15th with the title, A Basis for Interracial Cooperation and Development in the South, a statement by Southern Blacks, later named the Durham Manifesto. The Conference on Race Relations were a series of conferences held in the United States, mostly in the South, during the mid-20th century that aimed to address the issues of racial inequality and segregation in the region. These conferences were a significant moment in the civil rights movement as they helped to bring attention to the pressing issue of racial inequality in the South and sparked important conversations and activism that led to significant progress in the fight for racial equality. Through their discussions and efforts, the Southern Conference on Race Relations played a pivotal role in paving the way for the eventual passage of landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In addition to this context, in which prominent Black leaders and their white allies joined together in conferences to discuss issues of segregation, the manifesto was also affected by the context of World War II. During World War II, Black Americans were fighting for freedom abroad while facing the harsh reality that they were denied those same freedoms at home. Despite being an integral part of the war effort and risking their lives to defend democracy and freedom, Black Americans continue to face discrimination, segregation, and unequal treatment in their own country. They were often relegated to segregated units while fighting, and they were subjected to substandard conditions and unequal pay, and upon returning home, many found that little had changed in terms of their civil rights and liberties. The hypocrisy of fighting for freedom abroad while being denied those same freedoms at home was not lost on Black Americans, and their service in World War II was a catalyst for the civil rights movement and what would eventually bring about change. The manifesto, which was written in the midst of World War II, points out this hypocrisy in its concluding statement by saying, "The correction of these problems, by which they mean segregation, is not only a moral matter but a practical necessity in winning the war and in winning the peace." Therefore, the manifesto was one of the most significant Southern documents of the 1940s. It addressed the dichotomy between Black American soldiers fighting overseas in the name of democracy, while in the U.S. they were facing extreme racial violence and were being denied basic human rights. Though it predated the civil rights movement, the Durham Manifesto established a blueprint for the strategic struggle for African American civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s. Among the many issues that it discussed were the right to vote, abolition of the poll tax, abolition of white primaries, harassment of voters and police abuse, a federal anti-lynching law, Black juries and government representation, fair employment for Black police officers, defense workers, and workers' rights of collective bargaining, Social Security benefits for service and farm occupations, equalization of teacher salaries, school facilities, and higher education opportunities, the end of segregation in the U.S. military, and publicly funded hospitals, including Black patients. The 1942 Durham Manifesto was one of the first public statements made by Southern leaders that called for an end to segregation and a more equitable treatment of Black Americans in the South. Unsurprisingly, the Durham Manifesto was widely criticized by many white Southerners who saw it as a threat to their traditional way of life. The manifesto was also criticized by Black leaders who felt that it did not go far enough in addressing their grievances or that it did little to bring about actual change. However, despite the criticism, the 1942 Durham Manifesto was an important step in the struggle for civil rights in the South. It was seen as a charter for Black people to follow. It also kick-started the Southern Regional Council, which would continue to meet in interracial and all-white congresses, which promoted interracial cooperation to address voting rights and school desegregation, among many other issues. Therefore, though it is rarely remembered, the Durham Manifesto helped to lay the foundation for the civil rights movement that would begin to gain momentum in the decade that followed its publishing. And it would lead to landmark passages of civil rights legislation as well. Thank you for watching today's video. Please help us by completing a brief survey at the link on your screen and also in the video description. Your feedback will help NAHOF receive funding and help plan future projects. Additionally, please contact NAHOF with any questions or comments, or if you're interested in learning more about the organization. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and we hope to see you at our next presentation. Thank you.